Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. I had a lot of fun last week when I went over that old Captain America that I ran across just by chance, and I'm going to do something similar this week. I ran across another book that I was going through when I was going through my war comics. I came across Justice League of America number 171. Now, it's not part of a spectacular run by any means, but it's a pretty good book. And I got an interesting comment when I did the Captain America video. I got a comment saying that comics are good time capsules. And I was thinking about that when I read this book, and it certainly is the case. And this book is a good time capsule in a second way is because that it's pretty much, as we would see it today, smack dab in the middle of DC's continuity. Because it's from 1979, and you have an advertisement in this book for Action Comics number 500. So it was 40 years from Action Comics number 1 to this book right here, and it's been another 40 years from this book right here to Action Comics number 1000, which just came out recently. So give or take, it's smack dab in the middle of DC's continuity. And it's a good book to look at for a number of reasons. But the first one, again, is it's a good time capsule. And I'm just going to look at the ads just really quickly because I find these things really fun. But they do tell you something else about comics and the industry because this is 40 years in. So the industry is well established. So let's see how they worked 40 years ago as compared to how they work today. So just to give you, because I'm a big Star Trek fan, I'm going to give you the picture from the inside cover. And it gives you a little bit of a reference in your mind of what kind of time in history, what was going on at the time that this comic book came out. Star Trek, the motion picture, was just about to come out. The very first Star Trek movie. That was a big movie back then. So that was the inside cover. But I'm looking at a lot of the other ads in here, and it shows me something which, again, you'd never notice when you actually read these things originally. And unless what's going on today, you never notice these things really. But these ads are geared towards a very specific audience. And it really betrays who their audience is for DC Comics at this time. 40 years ago, they knew who their audience was. And even their advertisers knew who their audience was. And they were selling to these people. You got some advertisements for other DC books. You have, again, Action Comics number 500. You have a new science fiction book that came out from DC called Time Warp. But a lot of the other ones that aren't DC, they are geared towards young men. That's what they're geared towards. I'd say of an age group of, say, 13 to your 20s. That's the people that it's geared towards, because you have a lot of advertisements for toy soldiers. Your little plastic toy soldiers. You got modern ones, and you even got another one in the back cover. The old one that I remember was the Roman soldier one. Toy soldiers. And that was something geared towards boys. You also had a couple of advertisements in there about, selling magazines and things like that, or selling little toys, basically. And what did they show? They showed this boy who's sitting there wishing he had some money, right? And you have other ones about, of course, you have your bodybuilding and your karate lessons and your buy a rocket. All these kinds of things. There's even one in here, why I'd say it was not just young teens that this would appeal to. There's one in here about getting your high school diploma through the mail. And even in that ad, it shows a ring. It says you get a ring with your diploma. And what's the ring? It's for a male. There's no girl rings in here. Okay? So there's a lot of ads in here for boys. That's what it's geared towards. And of course, on the back page, it's got the Daisy 840. I'll put that up on the screen at the Daisy 840. Who didn't have a Daisy when they were a kid? Maybe if you lived in the city, you might not have had a Daisy BB gun, but everybody had a Daisy. It was like, Christmas Story, with the Red Ryder. Everybody had a Daisy. Go out and shoot things with it. And I still have both my eyes, if you can get that reference. So, to get into the book itself, another reason why I wanted to go over this book, originally why I wanted to go over this book, was because it is a crossover story between Justice League of America and Justice Society of America. Now, you probably know that in the early DC books, you had a different Earth. Okay, there was a different Earth. They switched over from Earth 1 to Earth 2, actually. What they really put it as was the old one was Earth 2 and the new one was Earth 1. This is all pre-crisis. Okay, so what happened in actual DC history is that early on in comic books, there was a lot of superhero comic books. You had your Batman, your Superman, Green Lantern, Flash, Hawkman. All of these things came out, World War II. There was a big time for superhero books. But then superheroes fell off in comic books and they started publishing a lot of other things, and superheroes didn't die out completely, but most of the comic books were war comics or westerns or romance or horror. All of these things came in and sort of took over from the superhero genre for about 10 years. And then they had a resurgence of superheroes. And it came about 10, 15 years before this book. But they replaced the heroes in the DC continuity somewhat. So they switched it from Earth 2 to Earth 1. You still had Superman and you still had Batman, and they looked pretty much the same. They were just a little more serious, not completely. But you had a brand new Green Lantern with Hal Jordan. You had a brand new Flash with Barry Allen. You had a brand new Hawkman with Qatar Hall from, how do you pronounce that? He was an alien. He was from Tangeria. I can't remember how to pronounce it exactly. But the old ones were all from Earth 2. So they switched over. They're heroes, somewhat. And I wanted to go over that because I'll give you the page here on the front. So you have your Justice League. You have Superman, Batman, Green Lantern, Flash, Hawkman, Zatanna, who looks really early in this. She even has a different costume that you'd never recognize, and Red Tornado. Whereas the Justice Society, you have the people that would go along with the ones on the other side. You have Power Girl, the Huntress, Green Lantern, Flash, Hawkman, Dr. Fate, and Mr. Terrific. Now, the reason I wanted to go over this is because DC did do that switchover. A lot of people think of DC as being stuck in the mud and that it's never going to change. But if you look at its actual history, they did change. They changed a number of times. And the change that they did, besides a change like Crises, where they would put everything together, when they actually had a change of heroes, they did it. It wasn't so quickly, I wouldn't say, but they did it and they cut off a little bit of continuity with the old Green Lantern, Flash, and Hawkman. But where it didn't work, they changed it back. Because they did it with Wonder Woman and it didn't work whatsoever. And they had to change back to the old Wonder Woman. And why I'm going over this is because look at it today with Marvel trying to change everything. Marvel trying to change all of its heroes. They didn't do it in a way that anybody wanted to see. But here's an example in comic history of a comic company doing it right. They switched over the heroes. And when it didn't work, they went back. And even when it did work, because it did work with Green Lantern, Flash, and Hawkman, they still knew that people wanted to see those old heroes as well. So they came up with the idea of Earth 2 and Earth 1. And they still had stories from Earth 2, where you had the Justice Society of America. You still had the old Green Lantern, whose ring was powered by magic. You still had the original Flash. You still had Hawkman, who was just a human being. He was a guy, I think he was a police investigator. You still had those old heroes. And even up into the 80s and the 90s, you still had those old heroes. I can remember, even though it was after Crises, I still bought Justice Society things, books. There was books about their kids as well. So you still had ties to those old heroes. They didn't get rid of them completely because they knew that they could still be used for stories, and they got forgotten slowly. And that's one of the big problems with Marvel trying to get rid of all of its heroes all at once, for no good reason, because it wasn't trying to reboot them because things had started over again, because in history here, there was a resurgence of superheroes where they hadn't been there for a while, at least 10 years. But when Marvel tried to do it, there wasn't a need for a resurgence. There was a need possibly to freshen things up, but they did it in a way that was so ham-fisted that no one wanted to see it. And no one wanted to see it so much that we now all hate those characters pretty much and never want to see them again. Only exception to that might be Miles Morales. So, this is the way, a good historical way to look back and say, this is how you do it right. You don't get rid of them completely. If you want to change them over, you got to have some ties to the past. And this is a good book. So, the book, if you're looking at the front page, which I already showed you, is called The Murderer Among Us, Crisis Above Earth 1. And I love the fact that it says Crisis Above Earth 1, because it talks about all these crises that these two teams had gone through since they got together. And it's just a prelude to Crisis on Infinite Earth. So it's great. But the story itself, and here's the thing again. The story, as with that old Captain America that I was going through, the story is pretty silly. But again, it's silly in a different way. When you look at books today and you're going through them and you're looking at the story and seeing how many plot holes there are and why is this and why is that, and that's just ridiculous. But the people who are writing them expect them to be serious. They come out as silly because they have no idea of how things actually work in, say, the Marvel Universe or the DC Universe. They don't know any history. They don't know anything about how the people's powers work or how their personalities are supposed to be set. And so they make themselves look ridiculous. The writers themselves are making themselves look ridiculous by making the characters that they write look ridiculous. And that's why it's silly today. But that's not what was going on back here, back in 1979. Yes, these characters do silly things. The story is a little bit silly. But again, you're coming off of comic books before that, which were totally silly. You know, things that would happen in it, it would just be kind of funny, ridiculous, almost like a sitcom. But you have things in this book. So I'll go over a couple of things in this book. One of the basic storyline is these two superhero teams, they're always used to coming together for some kind of crisis. But this time, instead of coming together for a crisis, basically they come together for a social occasion. And they're just glad that they don't have to deal with a crisis. And so there's a lot of sitting around and talking. And again, that would be something that you would make fun of in a modern book. But even though they do it here, they do it in a kind of nice way because the talking doesn't involve a whole lot of words because they sort of cut off sentences, which is fun. But another thing is that it gives you a little bit of drama and history about some things because you have Huntress talking to Batman, and Huntress is from Earth 2, and she is the daughter of Batman of Earth 2, who had died about 6 months earlier. And she's crying because she's standing there next to the Batman of Earth 1, who she thinks of as an uncle, and he's comforting her. And you have a lot of different things, like you have the two Flashes talking to each other, and the two Hawkman and the two Green Lantern. And one of the other things about these that I think that modern books could really pick up on is the fact that everybody has a normal life. And the superhero stuff that they do, that's just a little extra thing that they do. But everybody has a normal life, and you can see it in their talking. You know, you have Mr. Terrific. He's a literature teacher. You have the old Hawkman. He is, I think, an archaeologist, and so is Dr. Fate. You have what? Oh, you even have Hal Jordan. Guess what Hal Jordan is doing at this point in time? He's a trucker. Seriously. He's a trucker. That's his job. That's what he does. That's his normal life. And he's Green Lantern some of the time. I think, again, that this could be something that they really should put back into comics, because if you have superheroes who are just superheroes all the time, it's really hard to identify with them sometimes. But these people are just normal people, but they have superpowers, and that's over on and on top of who they are. So it makes them easier to connect with. But as I said, it's a social occasion, and they do it. Again, it's a lot of talking and a lot of exposition, but it's not quite as boring as you might think, because they do it in a fun way. They do it with retelling of stories and talking about villains and things like that. But still, it's not the most exciting thing in the world. And then there's an explosion which rips out part of the side of the satellite. And again, this is one of the silly parts, because you have all these people, not all of them are superpowered like Superman, and you have this giant hole, and it's a giant hole in the side of the satellite, yet they're not all getting sucked out into space. It's just a gentle breeze, basically, of the wind, of the air pushing out. And then you have Superman and Dr. Fate going out and grabbing up a whole bunch of asteroids, melting them down, and then Superman using his heat vision to make a perfectly fitted sheet of metal in order to put it up on the side of the satellite in order to patch up this hole. Silly. It's silly. Especially when you have 2 Green Lanterns there. All the 2 Green Lanterns would have to do is, because the 2 Green Lanterns come out and help and patch this thing to the side of the wall. Why didn't the 2 Green Lanterns just fix the hole? That's all they needed to do, right? So you have holes in your storytelling, to be sure. And it's, like I keep on saying, it's kind of silly. But the thing is that even though it's kind of silly, even though it's a story where you have a lot of talking and there isn't a whole lot of action, when I got to the end of this book, because this is the reason why I did it, this is the reason, the nail in the coffin why I wanted to do this book, is because I only have this book. This is a really old one that I just came across, and I didn't have the whole run. And it's a 2-part story. And I got to the end of the first part of the story, which is 171, and I wanted to read the next part. I'm really bummed that I don't have the next issue. I want to find out. And that's what a comic needs to do. Because, well, first of all, it's a mystery. And this is one of the things that I want to go over this at some point. The old Batman and a lot of the old books, but especially the old Batman. Batman was the detective. That's what they called him, the detective. He solved mysteries. He was like a modern Sherlock Holmes. There was even a crossover between him and Sherlock Holmes. There was a mystery, and he solved it. He stayed in the shadows. That was his thing about being a superhero. But these books are mysteries, and they draw you in with a good story. It's a mystery. So despite the fact that you have a lot of talking and not a lot of action, despite the fact that you have silly things going on, I still want to read the next book. That doesn't happen with modern books. If you're reading something that's a modern book and it looks like this, where it's meandering and doesn't seem to have a lot of purpose and there's no action, you want to throw it against the wall and then step on it. You don't want to put it back in the bag and go, I got to get the next issue of that. That's what they need to do. And again, let's bring it right back to the ads, because the reason why it works and the reason why they can hook you at the end of the story, even though it wasn't the best story in the world, so that you read the next issue, is because they knew who their audience was. They knew exactly who their audience was. And they wrote stories for that audience. And they know how to hook somebody, especially, it's a lot easier. I'll tell you, as a writer, it's a lot easier to hook somebody when you know who you're writing for. If you have a very specific audience and you know who you're writing for, you can write a better story. And that's what needs to come back into comics. This kind of thing needs to come back into comics, because it needs to be a story where you get to the end of the issue and you say, I need the next issue. What's going to happen? Because that's how you build an audience. And they're going to have to go back to something like this fairly soon, I think. They're going to have to stop this insane thing about events and micro events and all of these other stuff, and you're just a superhero. It doesn't work. It doesn't make you want to read the next book like it does here, because you have a book here that's pretty simple. You have a storyline that's pretty simple. You have people that are pretty simple. But it's a good story. At its core, it's a good story. And you get the person to read the next issue, and then the next issue, and then the next issue. That's how you build a customer base. And you build that customer base by gearing those stories towards that customer base. and people who are actually going to buy the books. And so you can also at the same time sell ads to these things for other people, because you can tell them, this is our customer base. You should come and sell ads here. That doesn't work like that in modern comics. So it's a really good book. I won't say that it's a great run book, but it's a really good book. If you ever want to read some early comics that have, well, they are silly stories, but still, it gives you a good glimpse into what comics used to be, and a really good, down-to-earth set of heroes. Go back to these early Justice League of America. You can probably get, if you can find them, you can probably get them for about $10 a piece, tops. But it's a really good story, and it's a really good snapshot of what the comic industry needs to be. And it lets everybody know that they need a Daisy 840. Because every little boy needs a BB gun. Definitely. Not joking on that. Don't shoot your eye out. Okay, so I will hopefully do a great run next. I have a lot of other videos that I want to do, but I'm trying to break them up a little bit with comics and a little bit of comic reading and great runs if I can, because I want to do those things, but I just seem to always run across these idiotic things that are going on today that I have to cover, because we need to make comics better. But one of the reasons, one of the ways that we can make comics better is by reading better comics, and to go back and to see what comics used to be and how great they were. Go back to something like this Justice League of America and see that comics were great once. And it didn't need a whole lot of spectacular goings on to make them good. All right. I think I'll find a little video to put at the end of this for a little bit of fun. Okay, I'll see you later. Bye.
No, I want an official red undercover knife and 200 JLA rifle.
You'll shoot your eye out, kid. Merry Christmas. Ho, ho, ho.